Iceland, 874 AD. Black lava fields stretching to the horizon, wind tearing low across frozen ground, not a tree tall enough to cast a shadow. Ingólfur Arnarson, the first permanent Norse settler, steps ashore and looks inland. No forests, birch scrub barely chest high, no quarries, no clay, iron too precious for anything but blades. Every building material the Norse relied on in Scandinavia does not exist here, and winter is 14 weeks away. Without shelter, a family is gone before spring. Yet within 40 years, over 400 farmsteads stood across this island. Some lasted for generations, built from driftwood that crossed the Arctic from Siberia, walls cut from the living earth, and joints held by wooden pegs that tightened with every year of rain. This video breaks down how they did it, stage by stage, and one detail, how the Norse chose which patch of ground to cut, separated a wall that survived centuries from one that collapsed before the third winter. Here is the scale of what these settlers faced. Iceland's interior is volcanic desert, lava, glaciers, exposed rock. The coast offered thin topsoil and relentless wind. When the Norse arrived, roughly a quarter of the island carried any tree cover, and those were not the tall pines of Norway. Stunted birch, crooked, short, rarely thick enough for a structural beam. What happened next was swift. Pollen records pulled from Icelandic lake beds tell the story in hard data. Within 2 generations of settlement, most of that birch was gone. Cleared for grazing, burned for fuel, stripped for charcoal, 80 years. And the island's only timber supply was consumed. Now think about the arithmetic. A working longhouse needs dozens of heavy posts and beams to carry a roof loaded with earth and winter snow. Back in Norway, the Chieftain's Hall at Borg in the Lofoten Islands stretched 83 meters, framed entirely in local timber. In Iceland, that kind of construction was physically impossible. The raw material simply was not there. No limestone for mortar, no clay fit for brick. Iron arrived by ship at enormous cost. A single axe head could represent weeks of traded goods. Using it for building nails was out of the question. But here is what makes this story worth telling. Centuries later, European travelers reaching Iceland found these structures not as ruins, but as occupied homes. Still maintained, still warm, still standing through conditions that crack modern concrete. Everything these builders needed was already there, in the ground, in the sea. They just had to know where to look. One image needs correcting before we get into the build. There is a persistent picture most people carry around. A crude, smoky pit, low ceiling, people and animals crowded together in filth. Primitive shelter barely above a cave. The evidence dismantles this within minutes. Excavations across Iceland, Greenland, and the Faroes reveal consistent, calculated design. Wall thicknesses calibrated to local climate. Interior layouts with clear functional zones. Roof structures engineered to carry tons of accumulated earth and snow without buckling. The farmstead at Eriksstaðir in western Iceland, identified as the likely home of Eric the Red before his exile to Greenland, sits on a south-facing slope, chosen deliberately. Drainage runs downhill away from the walls. Morning sun hits the entrance. This was not a man guessing. He was reading the land the way a navigator reads the sea. No written plans existed, but unwritten does not mean unplanned. This knowledge transferred hand to hand, master to apprentice, father to son. Every joint angle, every material choice carried generations of refinement. Tested not in a laboratory but under the harshest conditions in the settled world. These were not crude shelters, and the people who built them were not improvising. The skeleton of every longhouse was wood. In Iceland, that wood arrived by a route that still surprises researchers today. Thousands of kilometers east, the great Siberian rivers, the Ob, the Yenisei, the Lena, carry spring meltwater north through vast taiga forests. With that water come trees, whole trunks ripped from eroded riverbanks, logs swept downstream by floods. Millions pour into the Arctic Ocean every year. There, they freeze into sea ice, and they travel. For months, sometimes years. Arctic currents push the ice westward, past the polar cap, south toward Iceland. When the ice finally breaks apart in warmer waters, the timber washes ashore on Icelandic beaches. To the Norse, this was not wreckage. It was a building supply delivered by the ocean itself, and they guarded it fiercely. The medieval Icelandic law code, the Gragas, which still survives today, contains detailed rules for driftwood ownership. A log on your coastal land was legally yours. Court records include disputes over driftwood claims. Men went to legal battle over timber the way they fought over land. That is how scarce wood was. A single trunk could frame a doorway. 3 good beams could support a roof section. Men hauled logs inland, dried them, and split them with iron wedges along the natural grain. Split, never sawn. A saw severs wood fibers at random, weakening every cut. Splitting follows the grain exactly. Every fiber runs unbroken, end to end, measurably stronger. But even the best timber rots on wet ground. So before a single post went vertical, flat boulders were dry stacked into a foundation ring. No mortar. Gravity and geometry locked them tight. This raised the first beam above moisture and let air circulate beneath. Without it, a frame rotted in a few winters. With it, generations. From there, the frame rose. Vertical posts seated on stone pads. Cross beams locked overhead. A ridgepole running the full length. The spine everything hung from. And here is the structural decision that defined the entire system. This inner frame carried the full weight of the roof. The outer walls, which we will come to, bore no load whatsoever. They existed only to keep weather out, nothing more. That separation made the longhouse something rare in ancient building, truly modular. A damaged wall section could be stripped and rebuilt without touching the frame. Extensions added as families grew. The house did not resist change. It was designed for it. How reliable was the driftwood supply? Genuinely unresolved. Some researchers believe communities built reserves in productive years. Saga accounts describe families dismantling abandoned buildings when no logs arrived for seasons. What is beyond doubt? The Norse built an entire tradition around a resource they could not control. Whether that was planning or pure adaptive brilliance says something about how you raid these people. The comments are open. The frame stood, posts in the ground, beams overhead. Now the question that every joint in the building depended on: how do you lock heavy timbers together when iron would destroy the connection from inside? In wet, salt-heavy Atlantic air, iron corrodes, and rust does not just weaken the nail. It expands, splitting surrounding wood apart. Give it enough winters, and an iron fastener tears open the very joint it was meant to hold. Iron also had more urgent duties in the Norse world: axe heads, blades, ship rivets, things that fed you or defended you. Hammering your best metal into a roof beam would be like sharpening a sword to cut firewood. You could, but you would regret it. The Norse answer was the tree nail, a wooden peg carved from dense hardwood, oak, ash, or juniper, not round, often octagonal, so the edges would bite into surrounding wood when driven home. Then came the step that made it permanent. The peg was dried beside the hearth, days at a time, until every trace of moisture was gone, shrank, hardened to the density of bone. This dry peg was hammered through a precisely drilled hole passing through both timbers, wedged at each end for immediate grip. And then the Icelandic climate finished the work. Rain fell, fog crept in, months of damp air settled over the structure. The peg, seated deep inside the joint, slowly absorbed that moisture. It swelled, expanded into every pore and irregularity in the surrounding wood. The connection did not loosen with age, it locked tighter, year after year, rain after rain. An iron nail starts corroding from the day it goes in. A tree nail only improves. Same weather, opposite outcome. Anyone who fits joints by hand, timber framing, cabinetry, restoring something old enough to deserve the effort, knows the moment two pieces close together with firm, quiet resistance. Not forced, just right. Viking builders counted on that process. They assembled knowing the climate would finish what their hands had started. Alongside the pegs, mortise and tenon joints, seated beams into matching sockets, no fastener at all. In the most stressed connections, tenon, peg, and wedge worked together, each reinforcing the others. No single failure could bring it down. The frame was locked. The joints would only tighten with time. But bones open to the wind keep no one warm. What the Norse wrapped around this skeleton came from directly beneath their feet, and the precision with which they chose it is what every other account rushes past. Pick up a block of well-cut Icelandic turf, and you would be surprised. It does not crumble. It does not feel like soil. There is a density to it, firm enough to knock on with your knuckles, but with a slight give under your hand, like something alive, compressed into shape. That is exactly what it is. Centuries of tangled grass roots binding mineral soil into a natural composite. And the Norse treated this material with the same respect a shipwright gave his best oak. Not all turf was equal, and this is where builders earned or lost their reputation. Experienced men read the ground before cutting a single block. The target, roughly 60% root fiber, 40% sandy mineral. Too many roots, and the block deformed under weight. Too much sand, and it crumbled after a few freeze-thaw cycles. Wrong hillside meant a collapsing wall 2 winters later. How did they judge the right ground? Scholars divide. Some call it pure instinct, hands in the soil, knowledge passed, without explanation. Others point to striking consistency across sites hundreds of kilometers apart and argue for a standardized method. Either way, the stakes left no room for guessing wrong. Blocks were cut with iron-bladed spades, roughly 30 centimeters long, 15 wide, 10 thick, dried in open air for 2 to 4 weeks, then stacked in herringbone pattern, each course angled opposite to the one below. Not decoration. Angled layers locked under compression, directing weight inward. A straight wall settles unevenly. A herringbone wall self-corrects. The heavier it gets, the more stable it becomes. At full height, walls reach 2 meters thick at the base. And here is where turf outperformed anything they could have imported. Microscopic air pockets in root fiber made it a natural insulator. But turf also carried enormous thermal mass, absorbed warmth during the day, radiated it back through the Arctic night. Your walls at home resist heat flow, but they store almost nothing. When your heating shuts off, temperature drops within the hour. A Viking turf wall held warmth the way a stone holds heat beside a dying fire. Slowly, steadily, hours after the source goes quiet. And then the walls kept working on their own. After stacking, the roots inside each block continued growing. They pushed through seams between courses, threading neighboring blocks together into one dense, continuous mass. The wall was not finished when the builders stepped away. It was just getting started. Season by season, it knit itself tighter, denser, stronger, more weather-resistant with every year it stood. No manufactured material on Earth improves itself the longer it stands. If you have ever worked on a structure old enough to surprise you, joints tighter than new work, walls more solid than anything built last decade, you have touched this kind of material intelligence. If that ever caught you off guard, it is worth sharing below. And when the walls were up, the roof sealed, the hearth lit for the first time, the system came alive. Smoke curled toward the ceiling. Turf walls began absorbing the warmth radiating from the fire. Within hours, surfaces that had been cold earth became warm to the touch. The space between those thick walls filled with a stillness that the wind outside could not reach. In 1104, Mount Hekla erupted in southern Iceland. Volcanic ash, meters deep, buried the farmstead at Stong in the Þjórsárlur Valley. The family fled. The house vanished beneath a gray blanket of debris, and there it stayed, 8 centuries. When archaeologists excavated Stong in the 1930s, they found something that reshaped what we understood about Norse construction. The turf walls had held their form through 800 years of burial. The interior layout was intact. Living quarters, a dairy workroom, even a latrine. Post holes marked exactly where the timber frame had stood. Raised sleeping platforms lined the walls. A central hearth pit still held charcoal from the last fire. This was not a rough dwelling preserved by luck. It was a precisely engineered home frozen in time by geological disaster and still readable after 8 centuries underground. Modern developers offer 10-year structural warranties and consider it generous. Stong survived a volcanic burial, 8 centuries of silence, and the walls were still standing when someone finally came back to check. The site became the basis for a full-scale reconstruction built nearby, known as the Commonwealth Farm. Builders followed the original floor plan, original materials, traditional methods for cutting and stacking turf. That reconstruction still stands today, maintained, visited, and studied by researchers. Living proof that the techniques in this video do not just survive in theory. They work. 1,000 years later, they still work. 874 AD. Black volcanic sand. No timber, no quarries, no iron to spare. From that, the Norse raised structures that outlasted most of what we build today, not by importing what they lacked, by understanding, with extraordinary precision, what the land already held, what the sea delivered, and how those materials behaved across years and decades of relentless weather. Driftwood carried by ocean currents from forests on the other side of the world. Earth cut from the hillside by men who could read the soil the way a jeweler reads a stone. Wooden pegs that the rain itself made permanent. And walls that grew stronger every year without a single human repair. If the craft behind how people actually lived, the materials, the decisions, the intelligence applied under real constraints, is what brings you to this channel, there is more ahead. Subscribing means you will see it. A few Icelandic turf houses still stand today. Glaumber, Keldur, Laufas, quiet buildings in quiet, valleys open to anyone willing to step inside. The walls are cool under your hand. The air sits heavy, and the smell, damp earth, old timber, centuries of wood smoke soaked deep into every surface, is something no photograph carries. That knowledge was never written down. It moved from hand to hand, builder to builder, generation to generation. And what those hands left behind is still standing, 1,000 years after the last iron nail rusted into nothing.